Okay, this is day 184, part 2, and I think I'm going to start featuring a comment a day because some of the comments that I get on my channel are so incredible and they will just help advance everyone's understanding of the situation and just a much more refined, precise understanding of exactly what we're talking about. And while, CNN is worried about giving Trump a grade for the first 100 days and these really vacuous, meaningless, titles to different articles. It just seems like this paper thin, almost wet cardboard type journalism. And I want to go in exactly the opposite direction to really get about a fact-based, precise understanding of the truth. And this is written by a person that was on a cardiac team since the early 80s. They obviously know what they're talking about. They've been involved in the transplant programs and so forth. And I just want to read a little bit of it. At all large transplant programs at major teaching hospitals, there are ways to donate money to a transplant program as a grant, anonymous donation, or pay for someone's transplant. The money can be hidden, untraceably, anonymous, and from whatever charity of choice. So this is a way of basically making it impossible and opaque to see a pay-for-play type situation in a transplant situation. So this is the situation I'm talking about, where Middle Eastern sheikhs, right from the beginning in the 80s, were doing this for this kind of everlasting eternal life. And that's a repeating thing that I talk about through the UAE, especially over this last couple of days. This really started picking up. She goes on to continue in the late 70s, all through the 80s and 90s. Transplant funding has become very creative, and it's become known to coming from unknown and anonymous sources. This has been true at UCLA, Stanford, University of Colorado, at Denver, our friends there. Hello, Claude. UPMC, Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh. Temple, as I mentioned, Boston, Mass, as I've mentioned in the past, Johns Hopkins, it's going to be a key one, Jackson Memorial in Miami, Emory in Atlanta, Baylor in Dallas, University of Texas in Houston. I've talked about those as well. And I really want to say at this point, I think I've focused on the big offenders. Obviously, I haven't missed them all, but I think you'll see in this list that I've been measured and conservative in the length of time I've talked about these programs in existence and the number of programs. I've really just focused on the main offenders. And that's where I want to focus the research. I don't want to go shotgun at all these different universities, but I think by focused research, really tying down the kind of the UAE connection to like the Cleveland Clinic and so forth, or the University of Chicago, is the way to make progress and the way to prove the case. You don't need to prove 15 murders at 15 different universities. You only need to prove 3 or 4 to show the pattern. She goes on to say Tulane in New Orleans, University of Chicago, of course, one of my favorites, Cleveland Clinic in Ohio. We spent a lot of time there. Way back in 1984, trauma centers were started at big university hospitals and staffed 24 hours with OR staff, cardiac, general, neurological, orthopedic, vascular surgeons, and residents, and attending MDs about 15 minutes away. Those big trauma centers or hospitals were also the designated hospitals that established cardiac and kidney surgery transplant programs. Those were the early ones, heart and kidney. The organ procurement started with the MDs. The doctors themselves could procure their own organs and then rush back to the hospital with other staff that would transplant the organ. Again, 99% of the MDs are great, but if you allow that 1%, the doctor-at-tars, to go source their own organs, with the date rape under anesthesia, the 2.3 million in fake billing, the Dr. Fatahs of Detroit, killing their patients with carcinogens, hundreds of patients with carcinogens, the opioid doctors up there in Detroit. You only need 1%. So, of course, protocols and paperwork had to be followed. Death certificates always had to be signed off by 2 doctors when the person was declared brain dead. The person was kept alive. This still happens. Many, many news articles about this, where the family's not told that the person's kept alive for 1 or 2 days, just so that they can enable a transplant. Then the time of death is declared. Organ procurement has become a fine art and precise science. Way back in 1982, this woman was in a large teaching hospital on a cardiac team and started cardiac transplants right from the beginning. Foreign doctors were trained. She's talking about a fellow here from Iran. This is only 6 months after the hostage crisis had ended. And she goes on to say the next year there was a fellow from India via South Africa, disrespecting of women and so forth. Of course, everyone's going to have their individual take on this, but then livers start in 86, then pancreases start in 89, 90. So I think this is the kind of in-depth, focused research that really moves the ball forward. Now, I want to move to a kind of a YouTube live situation, but right now I'm being banned by YouTube. My subs are being held at 25,000, and you're supposed to only need 10,000 subs to do YouTube live, but for some reason they have disabled the live function. And I really want to get into this sort of thing where the understanding and the facts and the citations and the sources are so well refined and worked out. You know, we get down to the doctor level, we get down to the actual individual transaction level to prove out this sort of stuff, because what you're going to find is the Tom Glossers of the world and the favor peddling and so forth at like a Cleveland clinic is going to be very easy to prove. There's going to be this profusion of evidence. And you're also going to find a trail of bodies when people get in the way of that. So anyway, this is the direction I want to move toward, not only just in the area of organ harvesting and so forth, but obviously with, to a lesser degree, with the the child trafficking and so forth. But really get down to individual operations. If the Awan brothers are conducting an operation, get down to actually what happened. The whole beginning, planning stages, information gathering stages, the execution phase. This is the cover-up phases. So I want to take the same kind of open autopsy approach to all parts of the rat line. And that's it for part 2 for Data 184.